And Laura, if you can find the link to the yoga on Thursdays, just
Oh, yes, I will do that and drop it in the chat.
that would
That's a
be
great
awesome.
idea.
I just think would probably be a nice resource.
Yes, great idea.
Actually, the Tuesday, Thursday thing, if that's possible.
Mhm. That sounds good.
Thanks.
All right, welcome to Webinar for Busy Lawyers. We are so delighted that you are here. My name is Laura. I'm a law practice management advisor with LCL, or Lawyers Concerned for Lawyers, Massachusetts. And today's topic for Webinar for Busy Lawyers is why yoga and mindfulness, the science behind their effectiveness for lawyers. Very important topic. So today, for our guest experts, we have my own wonderful colleague, Tracey Meyers. She's a clinician with Lawyers Concerned for Lawyers. She also runs our mindfulness and yoga sessions. She has great expertise in those areas, as well as psychology background. And we also have a lawyer who is a partner at JLL Piper, and he's really found these practices to be very effective for him. So we're so glad to have both the clinical side and the lawyer side to delve into these topics. I know we have a lot to go over. So Tracey, I will turn it to you and I will let people know we will have time for questions at the end. So please submit your questions in Q&A and we will look forward to those afterwards. So
Great.
thank you.
Thanks, Laura. And so glad to be here. When Laura and her colleague Amy, my colleague Amy, asked about, hey, would you be interested in doing a presentation on yoga? I was like, oh, yeah. As my children would say less. Yeah, of course. I was like super excited, especially to talk about the science behind yoga and mindfulness and how yoga and mindfulness connect and how we can integrate it into our lives. I know for many of us, it's hard to fit it into busy schedules. We're going to talk about that today as well with one of our resident experts, Jarrod Matteson, who is a partner and also a practitioner. So we can hear a little bit about how that integration can happen. It is possible. But really to start with the science and understand the evolution of yoga and how it can support our mental health and physical health and well-being. So as Laura said, we will have some time for questions, and Jarrod's going to talk a little bit about, from a lawyer's perspective, what it means, these practices, how it's impacted him. And we'll do a quick practice as well. So I'm going to share my screen and we can start. All right. So we won't go too much into LCL, but this is a wonderful, hopefully helpful resource where we do presentations. We also do individual consultations, both for mental health and recovery for with one of our 4 clinicians and our law office practice management side to talk about anything related to career practice management, ethics, etc. All right, so we're going to talk about the psychological effects of yoga and mindfulness, and then move into the physiological responses that can occur, how these practices influence our daily life, not just during the workday, but outside of the workday. And then the ever-present question for so many of us, how do I fit this in my daily life? So I thought we'd start with a little practice. And, it's interesting when I lead chair yoga practices, what most people say, not to bias you right off the bat, but, I didn't realize my body was so tight. And 2, wow, that felt good. And it didn't even take that long, right? So now that I've already set the stage, primed you, let's take a couple of minutes just to do a brief chair yoga practice. So I can invite you to move a little bit away from the screen. Actually, I will stop sharing so you can see me more clearly here. Okay. And so just taking a moment to sit and see if you can place your feet on the ground and just feel yourself sitting, taking a couple of breaths, breathing in through the nose, and gently breathing out through the mouth. Let's do that again. Breath in and gentle breath out. Good. I'm going to move a little bit further back. I'm going to invite you to take your right hand and place it over your left side. So perhaps on the side of the chair, and take your left hand and scooch a little bit forward and place it behind you. We're taking a little twist. Okay. So as you inhale, lengthen, get nice and tall. And as you exhale, gently turn your head toward the left. So if you feel any discomfort in your neck, please don't take it so far, okay? We'll take a couple breaths here. Inhale, lengthen, nice and tall. And exhale, perhaps deepening the twist, taking your gaze over your left shoulder. One more time, breath in. And exhale as you breathe out, looking over your shoulder. Good. And then we'll come back around and do the other side. So when you're ready, taking the left hand over to the side of your chair, right hand behind you, sitting nice and tall. And same idea when you're ready, taking a breath in and exhale and gently turn your head over your right shoulder. Inhale, lengthen. And exhale, twist. One more time, breath in. And breath out. And slowly come back around. Now when you're ready, I'm going to invite you to bring your hands out. We call like sleepwalker arms. And press the hands toward the front of your screen as you arch the back. And then inhale, reach the arms overhead. And then exhale, slowly bring the arms down. Let's do that again. Bring the arms out, making a little basket, pressing the spine away, hollowing the back. Inhale. And then gently exhale the arms down. Good. And then draw the chin to the neck. I'm just going to take a couple of moments to let any tension go in the back of the neck. If it feels okay, you can make a little basket with the hands and traction gently, placing the hands on the back of the head and the thumbs right on the neck. And we'll just gently allow the head to rest toward the chin. Take a couple of breaths. Good, and then release. Draw the chin back up. And then bring the left ear over to the left shoulder. Feeling the stretch along the right side of the neck. Inhale back up. And we'll do the other side. Seeing if you can soften any areas of the body that you don't have to hold any extra tension. And gently come all the way up. Now draw the shoulders up to the ears. This may be familiar to a lot of us, right? And then relax them back and down. We'll just do a couple of shoulder rolls. Inhale, shoulders up. Exhale down. One more time. Rolling the shoulders up. And exhaling them back and down. And then final pose, we're going to just gently fold forward. So you can take a little time, if you can, just to roll down and maybe clasping right above the knees, a little bit of a forward fold. We'll take 2 or 3 breaths just to feel the back body. And then slowly come all the way back up. And just come back now and close your eyes, maybe taking a moment to go inside. And just notice your energy now. Notice the sensations in your body, if anything has shifted or changed. Notice the quality of your breath. Good. And you can open your eyes. We'd love to hear if anyone wants to put in chat. Very simple, like, what did you notice? And again, it doesn't have to all be things that are positive. It could be, I'm tight or whatever. But the idea of these little movements is we start to tune back into the body. And we'll talk about why that's so helpful in a moment. So chair yoga practices can be brief. They can be 3 or 4 minutes, all the way up to a full yoga class seated. So there's lots of different ways. You don't always have to get on the floor to do a class. All right. Thanks, Alice. So what is yoga, right? So one of the most confusing things, I think, if you're newer or want to start a yoga practice is like, well, what is it? There are so many different kinds. So the word yoga comes from Sanskrit. Sanskrit was the language in ancient India where the yoga texts come from. And the word essentially means to yoke, to harness, or to union, or the union, right? Union of spirit and physical body. So yoga's been practiced for thousands of years, right? The ancient texts go back 2 to 3 thousand years old. And we'll talk about the evolution in modern Western society, including how it is now part of Western medicine as well. It's considered a mindfulness practice, and we'll come back to this idea in a moment about how it emphasizes movement and breath. So mindful movement while we're breathing. So yoga commonly has these sort of things in common. So even if you're taking a hot yoga class or a yin yoga class or a gentle yoga class, there are some commonalities in all yoga classes. There are physical postures, which are called asana, again, a Sanskrit word, which means physical practice. There are consistent breathing practices where we regulate consciously the breath. That's called pranayama. Okay, prana means life force in Sanskrit. So essentially, it's like, how do we harness the breath to support us? And then things that help us to maintain our attention and concentration and focus. So meditation, pranayama, and asana generally are a part of all yoga practices. So essentially, we're looking at this pairing of breath and movement together. We know from the science, and we're going to dip into that in a moment, that breath regulation specifically can impact and influence our emotions because of the way it impacts our nervous system. So we're going to dive into that in a moment. I'm just going to check and see what people are writing in the chat. Less tight. I feel more relaxed. Just a little gentle movement helped me feel less drowsy. Yoga always makes me think about being on the floor, but the idea of changing your mindset to incorporate more chair yoga, Ray says. Yeah, right. So it's like, it is interesting how we think we have to have our proper yoga class, yoga outfits on, and we have to have our mats, and, we can do yoga in a lot of different places. So thank you all for sharing about that. So yoga and mindfulness, it's a form of mindfulness because it encourages practitioners, all of us are practitioners now, as we did our chair practice, to focus on what's happening in the body, the breath, and being aware of the sensations. So that mindful attention to what's happening in the present helps us to feel better. And we're going to talk about that. So this connection between yoga and mindfulness, we're always, sort of theming this idea of breath, mind, body, being present, non-judgmental observation. So while we're practicing, instead of judging our bodies, judging what we don't like, this or that, this idea when we start to practice regularly is just investigation and kind curiosity. Like, oh, I'm drowsy. When someone wrote, right, I'm feeling tired. It's like, okay, that's interesting. What do I need, right? So we start to get this we create a feedback loop when we start to become present in the body. And then this cultivation of stillness. So in yoga, we're moving, right? But we also have times of quietude. We take pauses. We do usually a mindfulness centering in the beginning. And then at the end, we come into a relaxation. So there's this idea of movement followed by stillness, kind of the yin and yang of practice. So we talked about this kind of ancient practice coming from India, and yoga started to come into Western cultures, in the late 1800s, early 1900s, a little bit. So there were some early practitioners that came to the US and to Europe, and then vice versa. Some people went over to India to learn, but it wasn't really till the middle of the 20th century where yoga started to penetrate into regular mainstream. And really, if we look at the research, it wasn't until the 90s and 2000s and now the 21st century where we start to look at the scientific and therapeutic properties of yoga. So look at these statistics. It was pretty amazing looking at yoga. Yoga is a $88 billion industry. holy cow, right? Look how much money. Now, if you're a yoga teacher, you are probably shaking your head saying, yeah, we don't make that. So yoga teachers do not get paid a lot, unfortunately. But millions of people practice yoga across the world. It's really surged in popularity, especially starting in 2010, and it's continued, right? Women tend to be the largest demographic, particularly ages 30 to 49. Yoga practitioners spend money on yoga classes, their yoga equipment, etc. Even children are practicing now. And so by 2026, it's going to be a $23 billion industry, which is pretty amazing. But here's the good news. You don't need to pay anything, right? There are so many free resources for yoga. So you don't necessarily have to pay to play, so to speak, right? There are lots of ways to integrate this into your life that aren't in a financial realm at all. So the US, the NIH looks at complementary medicine. This is a huge growing area because people are interested in not just traditional Western practices, right? And so yoga and meditation are the most widely used complementary and integrative health practices, right? So look again at in 2012 up to 2017, this big increase of people using yoga in a therapeutic way. And same with meditation, right? So we're doubling and tripling. So what does yoga mean therapeutically? What am I talking about? So in the 1980s, probably many of you are familiar with Dean Ornish, right? He had all the heart studies and he started to look at lifestyle. And one of the things he talked about was exercise and yoga, right? So yoga is often under the subheading of exercise in the West, which is fine. But it was this idea that yoga actually could affect our physical health and well-being, not just feel good, right? So it became part of this new movement that yoga could be a therapeutic practice to help with physical, and then we'll talk about this in a moment, psychological wellness. So in 1989, the International Association of Yoga Therapists, IAYT, was formed. It's still very popular, continues to grow. There are many, many research articles and many schools that are affiliated with IAYT. They're really committed to looking at the science and the healing qualities of yoga together. So yoga therapy is this process of empowering individuals to progress toward improved health and well-being through the applications of teaching and practices of yoga, right? So this goes far beyond kind of how we think about yoga, maybe at a gym. And again, I'm not putting down any kind of yoga because I'm happy if you're practicing yoga, that's amazing. But this idea of moving it from like going to the gym to work out to this empowering practice, something that affects not just our physical functioning, but our mental health. And we'll even talk about the spiritual piece in a moment too. And it's not just based on exercise physiology, but we're also looking at some of the teachings, which includes philosophy of yoga. So yoga has been really researched, and I'll show you the research in a moment, in the past decade or more, to look at how it can be helpful with things like mental health conditions, depression, anxiety, PTSD, schizophrenia, and some of the neurological disorders, Parkinson's especially. There's been a lot of research on MS and Parkinson's around use of yoga for physical and mental rehabilitation. So yoga can have profound changes in one's own emotional well-being and also can impact the body and mind. One of the unique things about yoga too, I wanted to share is sort of the social benefit. So yoga isn't so much about decreasing a symptom of a disease. So I'm working with some people that have Parkinson's disease in a yoga program. And what they often talk about is like every time I go to a support group or I'm talking to my doctor, it's about symptoms and the disease progression and medications. But when they take yoga, it's about feeling alive in the body. It's like what my body can do. Oh, I can sit and do this practice, or I can modify and feel my heart space open. So yoga focuses on living to our potential rather than the deficits or what we're not able to do. Yoga classes are available widely. Since the pandemic, the idea of being able to do online yoga has just burgeoned, where you can take live classes, you can take YouTube classes, wonderful teachers that are readily available. And in person still really is a wonderful opportunity because you get that social piece as well. Practicing yoga in a community can make a huge difference. a little side story, but I used to work at a psychiatric hospital in the state of Connecticut. And I started to teach yoga to our entire campus, including patients and staff and administration and physicians, whoever was willing to practice. And we would do it on the big lawn in the summer, on sort of this bucolic setting of an inpatient facility. And what we saw was that the patients, the staff, no one could tell who was who, right? We were practicing as one community. And for people living with serious mental health issues like schizophrenia or bipolar disorder, or were in a 30-day recovery program, this was huge. It was suddenly those walls and barriers were no longer there because we were practicing and breathing and moving together and laughing together often. Yoga has benefits around chronic pain, can help support weight loss or preventing weight gain, in addition to some of the other mental health benefits. So why does it work physically? So we know that yoga, especially something called hatha yoga is sort of what we mostly practice here in the West, which is asana, movement practice. And that can create an accelerated heart rate, right? So it gives us potentially some aerobic exercise. It helps us with balance, attention, concentration, right? It can produce a sense of ease and relaxation in the body, can improve flexibility, stability, like in the core, right? Can help with rehabilitation when people are rehabbing from surgeries, joint replacements. It can be a very gentle way to restore strength and balance. So psychological effects, this of course is what I'm really interested, well, I'm interested in the physical too, but the psychological effects are really what drew me to practice yoga myself. So yoga can help us, and yoga and meditation, I want to use these jointly together because as we've just established, yoga is a form of meditation. It helps us to decrease rumination and negative thoughts. So in that chair yoga piece we did, it's really short practice, probably you observed that during that time, you were just following along and noticing things in your body. But that's usually a space where we're not worrying about what to do later in the day, right? It's a very here and now focus, and that helps us to feel less anxious. It teaches us to monitor our thoughts and feelings. At the end of the brief practice, I invited you to notice how you're feeling, right? These pauses to really go inside and be with ourselves rather than being on automatic pilot. Yoga is not competitive. And I often say this when I'm teaching because those of us, and many lawyers are competitive by nature, right? And the idea is there's nowhere to go. Yes, maybe you can get a little bit deeper into a pose. Maybe you can hold plank for a little longer. I mean, you can create competitiveness wherever you go. That's not the goal, right? Ultimately, the goal of yoga, right, is to feel this integration of mind and body. And when we start to tune into our bodies, we realize, oh, that competitiveness may actually not help me, may hurt me. I will acknowledge in my early yoga days of injuring myself because I went too far in a pose. I was trying too hard to get into some kind of contortionist pose. And actually, I wasn't tuning into my body. So we have this opportunity when we practice yoga to be interested in the feedback our body is giving us and then to respond compassionately to the feedback our body's giving us, right? So that idea of non-competitive self-care. Yoga can give us a sense of meaning and purpose. And I've seen this over and over again with people that are living with cancer, neurodegenerative conditions like Parkinson's disease or MS, that we start to come back to things that really matter, right? There's something about the practice, the mind-body connection. And those people that go on to study some of the yoga texts find it very helpful in terms of finding meaning, purpose, and even how to navigate trials and tribulations in life. So people that often practice start to feel better inwardly and outwardly. It can give us a sense of accomplishment, right? And we're going to talk at the end about it doesn't take much. You can do 2, 3, 5 poses, which might take all of 5 or 10 minutes and feel a shift in your mood and your energy, right? And it helps us to go on with our day, so maybe even having a yoga mat in between, clients you're working with, and you just do a couple of sun salutations. We'll talk more about that part. So with the research, of course, we need to have more studies, and I'll show you a little bit about the research in a moment. The quality of the instructor is important, right? So probably if anyone's done yoga here, you've had good instructors, you've had instructors you don't resonate as well with. Just like therapy or just like anybody you're working with, a coach, you want to find a good fit. You want to find someone you relate to, right? So if you're, someone who really wants a motivated, very high energy yoga teacher, or you want someone who's really kind of more philosophical and meditative. Luckily, there's lots and lots of yoga teachers, and you can find one that matches. It can be time consuming if you go and take a class in a studio. It could take an hour and 15 minutes or so. Although more and more, we're using shorter practices and seeing some benefit. Some people feel like the spiritual piece is not at all for them, or they get uncomfortable with the idea that it has Hindu roots or roots from India. And so that may make some folks nervous, not so much in this area of the country. And yoga doesn't require like getting a doctor's evaluation. So people can get injured. I myself, have had that experience. You have to really listen to your body. And if you do have an injury, you're going to work, with your physician to see how you might use yoga to rehab. So you have to be careful, of course, with any kind of physical practice. So yoga has been shown to impact lots of different conditions, from arthritis, metabolic syndrome, asthma, pain, depression, right? Now, if you take a look here, I found this fascinating. Think about like in 2004 and below, we didn't even have the research. We knew yoga and mindfulness were helpful, but that was more anecdotally, right? But look at now as you get all the way up to 19, and of course, even beyond that, how much these are evidence-based publications around the effects of yoga for health. This is a little bit of a confusing slide, but I want you to just look at the trends, right? And these are all the papers that were published on yoga for these different conditions. And again, look at all the way to the left, 1970 to like 2000, there's very little. So this is new, which is so interesting, right? These practices have been around for thousands of years, and yet reviewed papers and published in clinical trials, it wasn't until really well after 2000 that this started to get utilized regularly for clinical trials, for review papers, for experimental designs. And again, looking at some of the research and limitations, that there still needs to be a lot more research done, because we want to see, is this going to help on a long-term basis? I'm always suspicious when we think about yoga or mindfulness as curing everything, right? And I want really to make sure that we emphasize today that it's important to have grounded science to back what we're saying. So there needs to be more studies, and thankfully the government, the NIH, US military have been doing lots and lots of studies now on using yoga and mindfulness for conditions like chronic pain, PTSD, etc. So I want to spend a little bit of time highlighting the mental health benefits. So this was huge. So in 2019, the American Academy of Family Physicians, well-recognized review, started to look at, wait, we actually are going to recommend yoga, not just mention it as an adjunctive, but actually talk about the evidence and how it can be used. And so this was for physicians. So if you were going to go see your family physician, your physician is looking at this research and getting a recommendation from their accreditation body. And essentially, they gave it an evidence B rating, which is like inconsistent, which is still pretty good given how little research was there before. But that depression can be treated adjunctively with yoga, which is so exciting, right? So just to even make it to that level where doctors would start to recommend this as a treatment. I don't know how many of you have gone to your PCP lately that have said you should do yoga, but some do now because of this Academy recommendation. And this is some of the findings that the American Academy cited, right? And they gave you some of the findings and how it can impact depression. And you're going to get these slides as well. So I'm just going to quickly go through them. Same thing with yoga and anxiety, evidence rating B, which is good. Again, showing it can be a therapeutic option for people, especially people that have anxiety and panic disorders. Awesome, right? And again, some of the research coming from the military with PTSD. Yoga and complex trauma. So in the past decade, there's been tons of research on this because complex trauma, which includes people that have been victims of abuse, assault, war veterans, people that have been exposed to trauma throughout their lifetime. That's what we kind of call complex trauma. It can include PTSD, but it often is someone who may have had lots and lots of early adverse events. That yoga can be a really important part of the healing practice. So there's a whole area of yoga called trauma sensitive yoga. David Emerson, who's out of Boston, created the Center for Trauma and Embodiment, and he's created this best practices to help teach yoga when people have trauma. So the JRI Institute, well known across the world for teaching yoga teachers how to create safe and healing environments for people living with trauma. And the idea of creating a safe space, avoiding triggers, using trauma sensitive poses, right? Because you can think about some poses that we do, if you think about, like, if you looked at a yoga journal and there's this lovely, beautiful woman on the cover in a down dog. Well, for some of us, that would feel very exposed. Someone who's had trauma may not want to feel like they're that open, right? So, how do we position people in a room, or how do we give them cues that aren't activating? We avoid maybe physically touching people and using inviting language rather than commands. Those are just some of the principles of trauma sensitive yoga. Trauma sensitive yoga has been shown to be effective with women that have had trauma, particularly people that have had interpersonal trauma, domestic violence, can help to reduce depression and anxiety. So there's lots of awesome, exciting studies around this. So why does it work for trauma? So yoga and meditation might reduce some of the autonomic dysregulation, the activation of the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, which is the stress hormone axis. Basically, when we feel under duress, our body sends all these signals, including cortisol and adrenaline, to the different organs and can create a sense of dis-ease, inflammatory responses. So yoga may be reducing that. It affects neurotransmitters in the brain, which can help us feel better, right? And it can counteract the impact of stress and anxiety. So, all right, that's a lot of stuff. I'm going to turn it over to Jarrod in a moment, just to kind of look through about how we can integrate yoga and mindfulness into daily life. And he's going to share his experience. One thing I want to just say is it can be really quick. That's why I like to start with chair yoga or a sun salutation break, where we can take just a couple of minutes, right? It doesn't have to be in this continuous hour and a half. Doing a couple of movements, getting back into the body, checking your mind, your body, how you're feeling. So I like to think about a 5-pose practice, which it could be just like what we did in the chair, or we could do that standing or on the yoga mat, taking 5 poses that you like, maybe one that's a little challenging, and putting it together as part of a 5-minute practice at lunch hour. All right, I'm going to stop sharing here and invite my colleague, Jarrod, to share a little bit about your experience, Jarrod, and thank you for coming and talking to us. Maybe a little introduction about you too.
Well, who is this guy? I'll talk about myself a little bit. So, hi everyone. Yeah, thank you, Dr. Meyers and Laura and LCL, for giving me the chance to join you on this webinar. Practicing mindfulness, which for me is primarily through meditation and breath work, the pranayama techniques that Dr. Meyer mentioned. Something that's helped me over the years, but it's something that I've done historically on my own. And so I'm grateful today for a chance to share my experience with everyone here, because more and more I feel compelled to get the word out that mindfulness generally is very beneficial, especially in the legal community. This is not going to be news to anyone on this webinar, but there's a lot of pressure and expectation on legal professionals. And the emphasis is often to rely heavily on our analytical minds, the focus can tend to be negative. What are the risks? What can go wrong on this deal? Or we're in an adversarial environment. So to me, unless we can consciously balance that out by connecting more with our bodies, with our hearts, it can be pretty draining on our energetic resources. And that can lead to feeling stuck or feeling tense or stressed or anxious, or we're just going through the motions or whatever it is for each of us. And so in my experience, mindfulness generally is a tool to help me manage all of these things. And it's been helpful, at least for me. So who am I? I'm a real estate partner in the Boston office at DLA Piper, where I've been there since 2007. Before that, I was at Brown Rudnick in Boston, starting in 2004. I began practicing meditation in the late 90s. And so it's a tool that I brought with me into the legal world. But once I was a practicing lawyer, my meditation practice really ebbed and flowed over time. Once I was in that legal environment, it feels like, how could I possibly have time to practice anything other than law? But if there's one thing that I've learned many things, but if there's one thing that I've learned through mindfulness is that attitude of not having enough time is a thought pattern that I don't have to buy into. And if I really think about it, I can find 10 minutes, I can find 20 minutes every day to engage in some form of mindfulness. And I found that when I do that, I'm actually creating more time. I'm far more effective, I'm more efficient when I prioritize just sitting for a couple minutes or doing some poses or breathing. So these days, my personal routine is I start my day 20 to 30 minutes of meditation each day before I actually engage in any of the legal tasks for the day. I've tried many techniques over the years, but lately I just like the simplicity of just kind of sitting, observing the breath. It's super easy. It's very effective. Then once I'm in my day, depending on what's going on that day, I'll throw in other periods of breath work. This might be a quick series of breaths to prepare for a call or meeting. If I'm too hyped up or I'm too sluggish and I need to pick me up, I'll sort of check in and see what's present for me then. And I can tap into different breath work tools to calm myself down or pick myself up before going into that meeting or call. Other than that, I just try to pay attention periodically just throughout the day, what's going on with my physical body. I have this super secret yoga technique. It was not part of what we went over earlier, but I often use it if after a stressful call or some tense situation, I just shake. I just get the tension out, just make sure I'm releasing any of that held on tension, so I'm not carrying it with me to whatever's next after that. And then every night I have a series of yin yoga poses that I do to end the day. Those are these deep stretches that really I often just do it after dinner, spending time with my family. I'm just on the floor, just making sure my body is resetting after all the stress of the day. Beyond that, I like to go to retreats periodically, try different modalities. I love doing that. It's for the community aspect of it that you were talking about. It's great to connect with a group, and that community aspect really enhances the overall experience for me. So that's my daily practice or my general practice. One other thing I'll say, just picking up on some of the themes from the slides, in particular the social benefit slide about a mindset shift that I had at some point. that it's easy to come into this and think, okay, I want to eliminate my stress, or I want to reduce my anxiety. But a slight reframe that helped me is that life, especially as a lawyer, is stressful. There are external things in the world that cause stress. So rather than seeing yoga or mindfulness as a way to remove those things, I started looking at it as a way to enhance my resilience with those things. So that idea that we're moving toward our full potential versus running away from something has been a helpful shift for me to actually motivate me to do it. It's like I'm trying to be better. So, the more we can be resilient and hold space for discomfort, we can hold conflicting or challenging ideas in our mind without being reactive to them. To me, it's made me, I think, a more creative problem solver and just a better lawyer overall. So yeah, that's what I do. I could go on. I'll stop there. Happy to answer any questions.
Yeah, so we'd love to hear any questions you have for myself or Jarrod about anything we shared today.
Tracey, Jarrod, I'll start with some questions we got in advance. First of all, thank you so much. This was such nuggets of information, and it would really align too with what people listed in advance as their takeaways, hoping to get away from the program, thoughts about how to incorporate this into their life when they're busy, how to try to relax their muscles, to manage their stress. And one of the questions that we had a theme come up, Jarrod, you were just talking about this with mindset shift. People wanted to know if they have worrisome thoughts, how can they try to transform it into positivity, or how they can try to reduce racing thoughts. And Tracey, you had noted in advance something about observing the thoughts rather than changing them. Do you want to expand on how that could help?
Yeah. So, we talked about in the presentation about yoga and mindfulness is sort of this non-judgmental observation. Because what happens for most of us when we have an uncomfortable thought, a scary thought, an anxious thought is we often have the thought, then we judge the thought. I don't want that thought here. I want this to stop. Why do I always think this way? Maybe I'm right. And suddenly we've had 25 more thoughts all about that original thought. And there's more cortisol getting secreted in our bodies and we're getting more anxious. We get kind of caught in a thought loop. So I have a lot of empathy for what that respondent put in, because we all feel that way at times. But this ability to observe, like, oh, there's anxiety here, or that's an anxious thought. Oh, I'm noticing a little bit of arousal in my heart. My heart's beating a little bit. I'm noticing a little bit of tension. And then if we can actually meet that experience and soften into that, what we often find is then all of those other thoughts don't happen. We still may have that anxious thought originally, but we've met it, we've observed it, we've attended to it, and maybe we even befriended it, because let's say there's tension in our neck and shoulders. We're kind to our bodies. We take a few breaths. Like Jarrod said, you noticed when you were tired that, oh, I need a little bit more energy. So we can address what our body and our mind is really needing rather than going into a thought loop. And it takes practice. It is, doesn't make it go away, but it helps us to attend in a much kinder way to that thought.
That's beautiful. Thank you. And Jarrod, I'm just going to incorporate in, because we just received another question that related to this about trying to stop the intrusive thoughts while trying to meditate, that they have struggle with focusing. Can you build on what Tracey added to share how you might deal with this?
Sure. That's a common reason why people don't start meditating, which I get it. It's very, very difficult sometimes to manage those thoughts when they're intrusive, and then the judgments come in, like Tracey was saying. The way I've always looked at it is those thoughts are it's the exercise equipment that we're using for meditation. The thoughts that are coming in are the things that you're there to notice. if you get stuck in a train of thought, once you notice that that's happened and you just come back to whatever your meditation focus is, whether it's the breath or the sensation of sitting on your cushion or a pose that you're in, by returning back to whatever that intentional focus is, it's like lifting a weight. And so it's great that there's all kinds of thoughts that are arising. That's your opportunity to come back. You're not going to stop them. You're going to, but every time they occur, it's an opportunity to notice them and then come back. By doing that over and over, you start to make room around them and they feel less compelling. We're not stopping them, we're noticing them.
That is great. Thank you both so much. We have another question. They're wondering about the benefits and experience of mindful yoga retreats and wondering if you can recommend any in particular.
Yeah, so luckily in Massachusetts, there are several retreat centers. So the Insight Meditation Center, IMS, in Barre, Massachusetts, Barre, is one of the most famous sites. It was founded by Jack Kornfield and Sharon Salzberg and Joseph Goldstein. Those names may not mean anything to you, but these are three folks that really are credited with introducing and making meditation accessible for people. So they created two meditation centers, one in California and one here in Massachusetts. So that's a great one for longer retreats. And then they have weekend retreats with excellent teachers. When you're looking for a retreat center or a retreat, you want to look at, what's the theme or the topic? Is the place comfortable, right? And then kind of figuring out what your comfort level is. So like if you've never been to a retreat, it could be very difficult to do a 10-day silent retreat. So you might try a day long or, a weekend retreat. There's many other places too. Kripalu in the other side of Massachusetts in Stockbridge has many, many yoga and meditation retreats. And then even there are just regular meditation centers like the Cambridge Meditation Center or Insight Meditation Center in Northampton that you can just join for free and sit with other folks as well. So those are just a few. There are a lot, but we are well housed in Massachusetts for some of the most popular and biggest centers in the country.
Thank you so much, Tracey. I'll add on too that if you are not ready for a retreat yet, or you don't have time for your retreat, we had shared in the chat earlier, LCL, actually from our very own Tracey, offers 20-minute weekly yoga sessions and also mindfulness. Mindfulness is on Tuesday, yoga is on Thursday. And so this is a great way because a lot of people are wondering, I have such a busy life, how do I incorporate it? You can do these from anywhere. I want to just note in too, someone had chimed in that they were so grateful, Jarrod, that you came onto the panel, not only as a representative practicing lawyer who also practices meditation, mindfulness, and yoga, but that they were so glad to see you represent the male when sometimes yoga and mindfulness are thought of as females. And I loved your response to the person, and I wanted to share it. How, Jarrod, you put the yoga is for everyone. Beautifully said. Our next question, do either of you have a mantra or repetitive wording that you use for your meditation or your yoga? Tracey, why don't we start with you?
I don't, but I definitely can find, I know it can be very helpful. Sometimes people will breathe in love or breathe out, relax. So mantra meditation is a very, very popular one. It can help to stabilize the mind and bring ease into the body. And I'm open to what works. Like Jarrod, I kind of like the simple practice of breath awareness. But for some people, having a mantra is really grounding and stabilizing. So there's good research to support that practice as well as awareness of breath.
I have one that I've discovered recently. I've learned different meditation techniques, including transcendental meditation, where that is the main practice, where you get a mantra, and that is the technique. Separate from that, my mantra for life that I've discovered recently is to ask myself, what am I holding space for now? And so by phrasing it as a question, it keeps me open, and it allows me to observe what's going on for me right now. What am I holding space for? And can I hold space for that? Make room around that, and then notice that judgments about that thing might be coming in, or different thoughts, critical thoughts about that thing might be coming in. So a continual practice of what am I holding space for now, to allow more and more of that to be observed. And so it becomes less sticky or compelling. So that's my current mantra. I've had others for years, but that's my current.
That's
I
great.
love that.
Thank,
Yeah.
thank you so much.
It's kind of like also an inquiry practice, just like this open question, you know,
Yeah.
that you keep going deeper into as you make space for it. It's really lovely.
We're having a lot of great questions come in. One we've had come in is, do you have any tips for the beginning meditator? For example, any apps or other resources that you like to use?
I do. I like apps. I think they are very helpful for beginning. I paused because, you know, there's sometimes, because we're so wedded to our phones, it's like we like this opportunity not to be, you know, always technology driven. And at the same time, the technology is excellent. So I do like the Calm app. I find that one is really helpful. And my favorite is Insight Timer, because it has lots of different guided practices. So let's say you want a practice for anxiety. If you put anxiety in, it'll give you a whole list, and the teachers are excellent. So those, Calm and Insight Timer, and Headspace is also a good one. There are some apps that are geared for just breathing, so they really train you in certain breathing patterns, so those can be helpful as well. But for just regular beginning meditation, I really like Calm and Insight Timer.
I've used Headspace before. I find that to be pretty helpful. It has a variety of techniques to get you in. And then others that I've used are just simple bells, just to mark the amount of time you've been sitting, but otherwise relatively silent, which is nice once you're in the habit of it. You don't necessarily need the guidance.
That's great. Thank you both. Someone else wanted to know about your thoughts on tapping. They've heard of it, wanted to know more, what is it and how does it compare to mindfulness, yoga, breathing, and etc.?
Yeah, so tapping is really, it does relate somewhat. You know, these are all beautiful complementary and alternative medicine techniques that often can help with anxiety and stress. Tapping, it looks at the energetic part of the body. It's based on similar to acupuncture, where you're using the meridians. You're tapping on different parts of the body that can activate energy. And energy in yoga, we talked about prana as energy, and in other traditions like chi, you know, for qigong or tai chi. So the idea of tapping on areas of the body to stimulate the flow of energy, people find that it can be very soothing, can be energizing. And so sometimes you might go to a yoga class where the teacher has an interest in EFT, emotional freedom technique, which is a form of tapping. And you could theoretically be in a pose and do some tapping or as part of the warm up. So I'm like really open to like what works. And I think there are many different practices that basically understand that if we harness energy, we feel better.
That's great. Jarrod, do you happen to have anything to add on that? Or if not, we can go to the next question.
That's not a technique that I've tried it, but not really. But now I'm gonna feel compelled to look into it more. That's just how I am.
Very good. So one of the advanced questions we had was wondering about adapting yoga for different individual body needs. Tracey, having sat in on your yoga classes, you are excellent at this. Do you want to share for our audience on how you can do it and how, regardless of, what they might be, struggling with for muscle tension or for different things, how yoga can help them?
Yeah. So, yoga can be done seated. We've talked about it today. Yoga can be done on, let's say we have an injury and we got a hip replacement. And so we can't really do a lot on one side. You can sometimes do the other side. The idea of finding practices you can do it all standing if getting up and down is difficult. Like the biggest concerns people have often are getting up off the floor. If someone's had an injury, or as we're aging, it's harder to get up and down. So sometimes when I'm teaching, I'll gear a practice to all standing or all sitting or all chair based. As you saw in our very brief intro, we can do a lot in a chair, right? Where we don't even have to literally get up. The most important thing is moving mindfully and listening to our bodies. I do like sometimes, if you're seeing a physical therapist that has a yoga therapy background, they'll often kind of direct you into some yoga poses that might benefit you as well. So if you are healing from a specific injury, I would definitely talk to a doctor or a PT that can give you that expertise. But yoga really, as Jarrod said, it is for everyone, and you don't have to think about it as, doing these great poses where you're in lotus position or you're getting into headstand. It's so much more introspective and really listening to what your body needs.
Beautiful. Jarrod, do you have anything to add to that, or we can go to the next question?
You can move on. I concur.
Very good. So this questioner wonders, if someone is struggling with concentration and focus, are there other options to achieve similar results? Tracey, what do you think?
Well, so yoga is kind of that. I really appreciate that idea. Sometimes in the beginning, to sit can really make people can get really distracted, especially if you tend to have a very busy, worried mind, which, many of us do. And so yoga, I know for myself, was the doorway in for a meditation practice. I was a much more active yoga practitioner before I did mindfulness. And I get little mindfulness snacks in the beginning and the end of a yoga class. And eventually that helped me to develop sort of the focus where I could extend it for longer periods of time. So movement helps. Walking meditation, yoga, anything where there's some motion involved can really help if your attention and concentration, are a challenge for you.
So potentially something like a Tai Chi as well?
Yeah, anything. So when we balance, think about the things that really help us focus. Yeah, to your point, Laura, when you have to stand and balance on one foot, for example, or when you are breathing in a particular way and you're learning something new, that really hones in our attention and concentration. So trying something new, a new practice, balance, movement, or a pattern of movements can really be helpful.
And Jarrod, what was your foray into this? Tracey mentioned that she was into yoga, it sounds like before meditation and mindfulness. Did you find similar?
I kind of went the other way. I came in through meditation initially. The first thing I learned was sort of traditional Zen Buddhist meditation techniques. And I just kind of went from there. I learned all kinds of different ones. And for me, the yoga piece came later, like the hatha yoga, the asanas came later out of me pushing myself too hard in other physical activities. And so needing sort of a way to recover, or a softer approach to movement. But once I did it, just seeing that overlap of, oh, actually, this isn't just exercise. This is another way to be mindful and pay attention to what's going on. What I do now most is the yin yoga, which is very slow, very stretchy, and really it's amazing what you can learn about yourself by sitting in the same position for like 5 minutes. So I'll just put it that way.
Those are great feedback about what you can learn about yourself, about how there's an entry point for everyone, depending on what your style is. And you can move onto other, movements that will help with concentration and focus as well. That's beautiful. It looks like we have time for just one last question, and then we'll wrap up. Someone said that they have heard about forest bathing and want to know more about it. Tracey, do you want to take this?
Yeah, sure. So forest bathing is this idea of bringing ourselves into nature and allowing the sensory experience of savoring the the qualities of the trees and the quietude and the sunlight and all the beautiful things that our nature and our forests give us, and to take that in and to do it really mindfully so that we're getting the benefits. So, most of us can imagine, the most beautiful spring forest and how, the air, and so to really not just walk through quickly, purposefully, but to take your time and to allow nature, and the senses to become alive. And a regular practice of that is shown to have benefits because it both has a mindful benefit, somewhat of a physical benefit of the walking, and then of course, maybe a spiritual benefit of feeling really connected to the nature and the world around us.
It's something I've tried at Canyon Ranch, which is out in Western Mass. I went there for a few days, and that was one of the offerings. So I tried it once, and it was wonderful. And yeah, it's a way to take in experience through other sense doors, which I think is where you're going with that, Tracey. So there's focusing the mind, right? There's maybe focusing on the breath or the physical sensation of breathing. There's different poses, but there's things to hear, there's sights to see. All of those are opportunities for being present with that sensation and bringing mindfulness to it. So I thought it was wonderful. There's not a lot of forests around me, so I haven't done it that often, but.
That is beautiful. And that ties in with someone who just left a comment, and then we'll wrap up here, that said the message they were receiving is that by far the most important thing is to incorporate mindfulness and meditation into one's daily routine, however it may be. And then they were asking about magical moments. And it sounds like you both have described some, such as Jarrod, yours at the Canon, when you could feel with the senses and feel really this zen and this peace. So I know that we are at the hour. I want to respect everyone's time. Thank you so much for tuning in for LCL's webinar for busy lawyers, why yoga and mindfulness have such benefits and the evidence behind them. I want to thank Tracey Meyers and Jarrod Matteson. You both were just terrific in this. Tracey, I'll leave it to you to mention again about the yoga and mindfulness as classes you lead.
Yeah, so come join us. And if you sign up, you can take it on demand as well. It is really low key, so we have fun, and it just gives our bodies a chance to actually move, connect. And then the mindfulness practice on Tuesdays, I theme different things in. So sometimes we'll go into some of the Buddhist teachings. Other times we'll do more psychological kinds of practices to help with challenging emotions. But the idea of just practicing in community. So we love you all to drop in and join whenever you can.
Very good. Thank you all so much, and hope you have a wonderful day. And we hope we will see you back for future sessions. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Laura. Thanks, Jarrod.
Thank you.